And the notion that we save the American economy by bailing out, top banks and propping lots of taxpayer dollars into them, I think that's been the problem from the beginning. We have to look at the American economy from the ground up. If we don't have any jobs, if we're not producing anything, if we don't have any genuine wealth that we create, there's a reason other countries are worried about holding our paper.
Can inflation, if inflation does go up, explain how that relieves us of our debt problems.
Well, what it does is it takes your, look, suppose you got about, $100 worth of bonds, you get 4 or 6% inflation, the real value of that bond falls dramatically, falls, and then people are saying, wait a minute, I need higher interest rate if I'm going to buy this trash, and then all of a sudden the interest rates start going up, and this is what Bernanke's saying, that the United States is risking, he said, from what I read he said yesterday.
Yeah, but we got a problem anyway, because the problem when inflation goes up, you're paying back with cheaper dollars, but the problem on the other hand is that it means who wants to invest in small businesses, who wants to get any kind of business going. We're already in trouble on that front. It's not as if we're in a good place trying to think about whether or not to get to a better place. We're in a place right now where, having pumped all this money into the financial institutions, their response has been to hold it. The whole notion about velocity of money, how fast money moves around. I was talking to someone yesterday who said the velocity of money right now is 0. You put it into the banks and it just stops.
You know what's frightening? If you look over the past couple of decades, what's so frightening right now is that this economy has been primed. You look at the late 1990s, and we had the high-tech revolution, and then you had the Wall Street bust, all the pets.coms and all of that money, then we collapsed. And then during the Bush administration, we cut taxes twice, we fought 2 wars, we launched a $7 trillion entitlement program, the biggest domestic discretionary spending ever. We did everything. You talk about Keynesian economics. Conservatives don't know this. George W. Bush was Keynesian economics on crack. Barack Obama comes in. He's talking about spending even more money. And despite all of that spending, Keynesian's gone wild. We're still looking at a flat economic growth, possibly a lost decade like Japan has. If this goes on at 1% growth, flat growth for another decade, with all the spending we do, we could default on our debts.
This is really, we're getting into really scary times right now. And part of the reason to me that it is so scary is that we are now nearly 18 months past the big crisis, staring over the abyss. Is there going to be an economy starting tomorrow? And yet, we haven't made serious changes in how we act. We haven't made any serious changes in any of the rules to govern our financial markets, to govern our economy. I think partly because there are very powerful interests that believe that they can profit from keeping status quo, and they don't want to make serious change.
This is a big story, that after we just faced what we did, that there is such a crisis in governance that Republicans and Democrats can't come together to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. We passed that abyss 18 months, but almost nothing has been done, and yet the lobbyists for the financial industry have upped their lobbying by what? It's remarkable. It's a remarkable amount of lobbying, and banks are now making record profits off this spread, right?
That's right.
Borrowing from our federal government at 0%.
That's right.
And then profiting off poor people and people who cannot pay their credit card debts and paying 20% and 30% interest.
That's right. That's our plan to rebuild the American economy.
But to Joe's point, you got 300,000 housing starts. We haven't had that since what, 1945 or 46, and you got consumer confidence is now gone to a 27-year low, and you got, as Nora says, the Republicans aren't going to give you 10 cents in tax hikes, and the Democrats are not going to start cutting Social Security, Medicare, education, and all that. So you got a complete gridlock in government, and you're running deficits at 10%, 11% of GDP. We're headed for Athens.
So What you're talking about, though, is you're talking about the government end of it, but watch, it's both halves. It's Nora's point. It's also what happens now on the private end. What the government is doing right now is it's permitting a set of rules that says, in effect, hey, banks, we will lend to you at zero, and you go out there and figure out what you can squeeze out of every American family. No new rules at the road.
How do you kick a bank into lending when they say, look, we're making money and I'm not going to lend that? Those guys that did, you see Lehman Brothers? We're not going the way of Lehman Brothers. Yeah, we're making money. We're a private enterprise. That's what we're in business for. And don't tell us to go lend, make stupid loans.
Whereas private enterprise, as long as we're getting your tax dollars to back us up, and as long as we're getting your guarantee for free,
now let's
that
talk
if
about
we get into any trouble, you're going to bail us out.
For Elizabeth. A TARP.
Yeah.
What's the payback right now? What banks have paid back? Who still owes? Tell Americans what the balance sheets look like.
So remember,
we gave, what, $700 billion?
$700 billion was allocated. We ultimately spent roughly about $600 billion of it. We've gotten about $450 billion of it back again.
Which banks? Who's paid back?
Oh, come on. I can't do this at 5 in the morning.
Sure, but the big ones are like Bank of America.
Most of the big ones. That's right.
The big ones are paid back.
AIG's not.
Most of the big ones. We're going to do a hearing today on GMAC. GMAC certainly has not paid back. Okay. We still are big shareholders in Citi. So we've got
Citi and AIG, I guess,
and
a lost
AIG.
cause.
Well, they're still working to see if we can get some part of it back.
Oh, good.
Okay, so we're doing that. We've still got our investment in the auto industry. We're going to make some investments in housing. So in terms of the dollars, most of the dollars are going to come back. And as the president said, if I don't get all the dollars back, then I'm going to tax the large financial institutions to make up the difference. The part that will linger and is lingering right now, long after TARP is gone, is the very fact of the guarantee. It's the fact that 18 months ago, when we faced the abyss, the Secretary of the Treasury rushed in and said, oh my gosh, here's $700 billion to back you up, because no matter what, not under any circumstances will we let a large financial institution fail. Those financial institutions now operate with that guarantee. They don't pay anything for it. They operate with that guarantee.
And Elizabeth, more offensive to most Americans, those banks that were too big to fail 18 months ago are even bigger today.
And,
how does that? And this is what's so offensive to me is whenever somebody in Washington holds a gun to my head and says, "Do this or else you die." That's what we were told on September 15th. Give us $700 billion with no conditions.
That's right.
3 pages from Paulson, or else you die. Well, if tomorrow there was a new financial instrument that started to go south, and all of these banks, it would be the same thing. We've learned nothing over the past 18 months. They still have us over the barrel.
In fact, the credit rating agencies know this. A few months ago, the credit rating agencies put out the rating on Citibank. They said Citi gets an A, but if it didn't have the government guarantee, it would have a triple B. It's getting a 4-click point increase because of a guarantee. Taxpayers who don't get paid a penny for that insurance.
But if you give the guarantee,
for my car insurance.
give the guarantee, then you ought to be able to set rules. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other thing. You can't have a casino and a bank married together, right?
Right.
Isn't that what we got?
I think that's exactly what we
Okay, before you go, we want to ask you about a credit card reform. There's been so much talk about these new changes to rules. Are there real changes? Is there real progress? Because this is an issue that we've talked about for years.
So you're talking about the CARD Act that went into effect this week. Let me tell you, I grew up in Oklahoma. This is out on the prairie. The Credit Card Act, it's good. It outlawed 10 bad practices, but it's like putting 10 fence posts, hammering them into the ground on the prairie. If you're dumb enough to run straight into one, it will hurt. But if you just move a little left or a little right,
so how are they
you can
doing
get around these. The credit card companies, according to the Center for Responsible Lending, they've already done the analysis of the 10 you can't do these. They've already figured out how to get around them.
So if you're a credit card holder, you've got to be incredibly careful.
No, so what we've got to do is
read all 38 pages of fine print.
It won't do you any good. Don't read the 38 pages. They're not going to do you any good. The truth is, this is why we need a Consumer Financial Protection collection agency. You need an agency that can come back, and when
More
somebody
government,
jogs left, you move.
More government, more agencies, more limos, more assistant secretaries.
7 agencies now have some piece of consumer regulation. Bloated bureaucracy. This says let's slim it down
Homeland Security.
and make it work.
Stop.